Today, we're talking about gout, an illness that's often dismissed as just the result of too much rich food and too much alcohol, but which actually carries a much deeper emotional and subconscious story. Welcome back to the Mind Change Podcast. I'm your host, Heather McKean. Before we jump into today's episode, I have a quick favor to ask. When you subscribe, share, or comment, you're helping this work reach someone who may be quietly searching for hope. Please take a moment to help us in our mission to help Mind Change reach the world. Medically, gout happens when uric acid builds up in the body, forming sharp crystals in the joints. Very frequently, it shows up in the feet and especially the big toe. And from what I'm told, creates excruciating pain and inflammation. Historically, it's called the disease of kings because of its association with indulgence. But today, gout affects millions of ordinary people across all backgrounds. Now, the question I love to ask is, why this condition in this part of the body, in this person at this time? For me, I'm like, okay, if gout's happening to this person, this particular person in this place at this time in this part of their body, I think there are messages. And so much of our work goes to show that that's true. And again, this isn't new age. This is very, very old age. This was the beginning of time, the beginning of medicine. People knew this. And we've just lost touch with that a little bit. So from a metaphysical standpoint, gout is often the body's way of holding onto anger, resentment, and control issues that were never safely expressed. So for many, it starts with denied anger toward a parent or authority figure, right? So as children, maybe you weren't able to express boundaries or stand up for yourself, or even this could have been in school or religious environments. The feeling that you have to just shut up and listen and obey, kind of a mindset. It creates a helplessness. And that helplessness ends up turning inward and becomes suppressed rage. Suppressed rage looks very different than expressed rage. So oftentimes we're thinking that someone's holding a lot of anger or rage might be, kind of an angry seeming person. And that's not always the case. Now, there are times where maybe inadvertently we'll see little outbursts that seem very out of character for these people. But that's really coming because rage and anger is a very healthy emotion. But when it's not suppressed, it has nowhere to go. It turns into rage. And rage is very inflammatory. So over time, if someone has been unable to express anger in a healthy way, that unspoken anger simmers beneath the surface. And then it manifests as, later on in life, a strong need to be in control because they had no control themselves as children. And that caused them to be very angry, which makes sense. Children are supposed to have freedom and self-expression, and that's the best way that they learn how to be an individual person, a person with interdependence in a society. If they don't learn how to do that well and in a healthy way, then they end up with an interesting relationship with control. So we'll sometimes see passive aggressive patterns in these people. And sometimes later in life, that can eventually collapse into outright rage. There sometimes is a resentment towards authority or towards life itself, maybe a deep sense of being unsupported. So sometimes we think, oh, resentment, people are holding on to bitterness and they've got this nasty attitude. But sometimes that can actually just turn itself into a really deep belief system that I'm unsupported or I'm even under attack by anybody who I see as an authority figure. So it might not automatically look like I've got a problem with authority, but how it plays out over time is the person inevitably feels like, oh, actually, my boss doesn't support me. My leader in some way doesn't support me. The person who I'm under or should be, I'm working for or helping out doesn't actually support me, but rather they attack me. They should be providing me protection, but they're the ones that are furthest against me. And a lot of that is this subconscious filtering that's happening. Physically, if we're talking about physiologically, the acid buildup mirrors the emotional acid of that bitterness, guilt, rage, or even regret that has never had a chance to be released. So I like looking at these things through actual client stories because they can be helpful in connecting with people on a personal level. So let's take a look at gout through the eyes of a client that we're going to call Marcus. Growing up, Marcus's parents were what we might call emotionally absent, but physically there. So these might be parents that stayed together, were always around, but they weren't really there emotionally. This may be typically represented as the father who was there, but was like reading the paper or watching TV. So physically there, but wasn't really trying to connect with the child on an emotional level. Possibly a mother who, through her own set of circumstances, is someone who's fearful and worried and anxious. And so she might be there, but to connect with her would mean to be connected to the high anxiety, and therefore it creates also an absence. And there's many other ways of there being emotionally absent parents who were actually present. This can be very confusing for people because they're like, no, but my parents were there, so I guess I can't really feel bad. I have nothing to feel bad about. But if someone is doing these things later in life and feels like they weren't close to their parents, but their parents were there, then this can be one of the ways that manifests. It could also be that the parents were there, but they had very, very high expectations. So for Marcus, this was the case. His father used shame and criticism as motivation. And so his father, as a way of, making Marcus a man and doing what Marcus needed to do in life, he would use shaming tactics or criticism, thinking he was being motivating. Now, Marcus's mother, on the other hand, was someone who was very anxious. She was fearful. She was anxious. She was someone who needed to be in control all of the time, but it didn't look like control. It looked like chaos. And it made Marcus's home life very unpredictable. So Marcus learned very early, don't show weakness, don't make mistakes, and don't expect support. By adulthood, he became a high achiever. But underneath his success, there was this simmering resentment, simmering feeling of things not being fair or him not really being seen, heard, valued, but had no real reason, he thought, to feel that way. So again, it was pushed, even for him, he would feel this way and then he'd push it down like, I have no excuse. There's no reason. My life is good and I have this and I have this. So his victories always felt bittersweet because they weren't driven by joy. They were really driven by this need to prove himself. So when Marcus developed gout in his 40s, it wasn't just about his diet and lifestyle. It was his body manifesting decades of suppressed rage and guilt, and also the crushing weight of the way Marcus tried to control everything, trying to make everything okay as a way of connecting with others. But as we know, and we don't know this as we're doing it, but control does not equal connection. The subconscious mind tries to tell us that, but that's not what usually results when someone's being controlling about others or their environment. That actually pushes away connection. And of course, as we know, as we talk about frequently on this podcast, our early childhood environments greatly shape our health outcomes later in life. So here are a few foundational experiences that we typically find in our clients who do gout. So it's very common that they were pushed to succeed, but never given what they felt like was the emotional support to do so. Like Marcus, people's parents may have used guilt or shame or dominance instead of encouragement. For a lot of people, crying or showing anger wasn't safe. So rather they bottled it up inside. They may have been witness to parents who lost control, whether that would be losing control in anger, like bursts of anger or outrage, fits, parents having fits of rage. On the other hand, the losing control could be someone who is feeling very out of control themselves and therefore was very anxious, very controlling, very manipulative. And so the child, without realizing it, made a vow to themselves never to be like their parents. And so inadvertently put a lot of control on themselves. It can be very common if a child grew up where their family lived in constant drama or chaos or worry, and that would have kept the child's body and nervous system kind of on edge. Over time, that builds up. That's kind of, again, like we talked about before, kind of an acidic buildup. Someone who does gout later in life may have had a childhood where they felt unseen, unsupported, or rejected. Now, as an adult, Marcus carried those things that we talked about forward. So he pushed himself and he judged himself harshly. And again, coming from the history with Marcus and hearing the way he perceived other people felt, it looked like from the outside, most people had no idea that this stuff was gurgling up underneath, right? He really managed it quite well. The amount of hardship or hardened way that he dealt with himself. And he would have those kind of harsh inner voices with himself, trying very hard not to recreate his parents and what he felt like was happening with them. But again, that causes so much need for control, which means he's now just disconnected from himself, which was the problem he had in childhood of not really being connected with, right? So for him, his life, when he would go through something, he would have these gout flare-ups. And it would be because the pressure of staying so controlled and not allowing any of this stuff that was bubbling up underneath come out, it was his gout that was doing it for him. And through the work that we did, we started tracking back those connections. So some other adult manifestations for people, if you don't really resonate with Marcus, is that you could also be doing control, perfectionism, but it also could be looking like worry. So you may not be someone who does a lot of control, but you might be someone who's doing a lot of worry. Now, worry is a form of control because worry is controlling the future. It's thinking about the future, but only through the vision of what could go wrong. So worry still is about control, but it often doesn't look like or feel like someone else who's trying to do control in a different way. So someone who's doing gout might be someone who worries about the future. does some catastrophic thinking, is often thinking about the things that haven't happened yet and isn't really being present in their body. Someone who does gout might feel trapped. So they may have found themselves in a relationship or a job or a role, and they may have loved it and been really committed to it when they got into it. But over time, because of their filters, it usually ends up being and feeling a lot like their childhood did, right? And they come to resent it. A person who does gout might be someone who's actually serving and giving a lot to others and would never say it and maybe never even allow themselves to feel it, but secretly they feel like their own needs are not being met. So they're giving and they're serving and they're doing so much for other people, but personally, they're not getting their needs met. Now, sometimes what ends up happening is that shows up in a pattern of numbing emotions. So they're having a lot of emotions, but they learned in childhood it's not okay to express them, but they've got to do something with it. So they look to numb. So I think this is why gout is so frequently related to issues with food, alcohol, or substances, because food, alcohol, and substances, or even work, can be associated with the numbing of emotions. It's the substitution theory that I can feel my emotions through food or alcohol or substances or work. And that's really what is being done. It's just instead of actually feeling them, we are transmitting them into these different things. And that's very common, but it's really extremely common in gout. Also, people who do gout can feel really stuck between pleasure and duty. So what this looks like is feeling really torn between what they want to do and what they should do. Now, this speaks back a little bit to that kind of inner critic or that harsh voice. There's a major voice usually, and this was the case with Marcus and has been for other people. There's a voice of, you should, should. And they kind of feel like they're living out of balance. They're always doing what they should do, but never doing what they want to do. And again, that's just recreating that childhood environment of being with people who should love us, but don't connect with us. And that plays out in many different ways. Now, from metaphysical terms, gout is about rigidity, resentment, and being stuck. Now, remember, we say that it often happens in the feet, especially in the big toe. So the feet are about movement, direction, standing one's ground. So when there's pain here, it can often reflect messages like, I can't step forward. I can't be who I want to be. Or I can no longer stand for this, or I can't stand up for myself. I can't defend myself. The swelling and inflammation symbolize the overflow of emotions, again, referring back to that acid that were never released. Now, German New Medicine adds a different perspective. They believe that gout is not just uric acid overload, but it's actually a healing phase after a major issue is resolved. So, for example, someone who feels trapped or unable to defend themselves might finally stand up for themselves in a way. And then, interestingly enough, shortly after that, experience a gout flare. The pain is actually the body repairing, not breaking down. So this is when the body's doing for you what we should be doing. Now, the people I've worked with gout would like to learn a different way, that instead of doing gout as a way of the body repairing and a way of standing up for oneself, that they do the work and the body then follows in health and in support rather than the inflammation and the pain. But to some degree, that could be considered a positive thing, that sometimes gout flares, if people track them back, it might flare after you've actually done something good for yourself. Now, that's, again, kind of recreating a childhood cycle, but it's good news that you are trying to break that cycle with the best tools that you have thus far. Leading into that, gout is also often connected with breaking generational cycles. That also contributes to the theory that gout flares are about healing. So often the pain and the inflammation is an invitation to move forward out of the old stories and patterns that might be centuries old, right? It can be painful to let go of ancestral strongholds, but it gets more painful for each generation that has had to hold it. So gout is often a message that if you are willing to break the cycle and heal, then you're actually breaking the chain for future generations. So that's what we love about the mind change approach, because it invites you to explore, what anger have you denied? Who is this really about? To really look at your control patterns in a different way. Where do you feel the need to dominate and control, and what fear lies beneath that? Also, when we look to address the regret and guilt that's often there, what past choices are still weighing on you? What's the benefit of holding on to them? And then oftentimes around boundaries too, where have you let others invade your space, silence your voice, or overridden your own needs for other people? Like, what would it look like to express what you feel rather than store it up? And so, of course, we have practical steps to healing, which would be getting in touch with the unspoken words that we've held back, or the emotions that we've held back. So oftentimes we invite people to work with a practitioner so that they can rewire these childhood scripts of powerlessness and shame. A big part of this, and people can do this work on their own, we teach people how to do this on their own, but is to explore forgiveness, not to excuse, but to release the poison, the acidity of the bitterness that we sometimes are holding within us. And also, again, to sort of reframe our relationship with control, to regain that sovereignty and safety within ourselves, so that we're not always having to control our outward environment as a way to stay safe. And then finally, that addressing that problem of duty and pleasure, the being torn between duty and pleasure, is really, it's very difficult to find out what would bring you joy and what would bring you pleasure if you're not feeling your feelings. And so really getting into, like, where is my freedom? Where does it come from? So gout often shows up in the joints, but at its root, it's about anger, bitterness, regret, and the pressure to control what was really never meant to be controlled in the first place, right? Our environment, really about bringing us back into our body. Because when we begin to release old bitterness, we can soften the rigidity and allow ourselves to grieve and forgive. Then we allow the body to release all that pressure and all that acid that it's been storing up. Okay, that's it for today's episode. If you are ready to take the next step, we would love to help. You can book a free consultation with one of the founders here to explore your unique situation. Or you can start right away with our online course. It includes 2 private sessions with a trained practitioner, but it also gives you all of the steps to help you uncover the roots of your symptoms and create lasting change. It puts the power back in your hands where it was always meant to be. Now, if this episode spoke to you, the best way to support our work is simple. Subscribe, download, share, leave a comment, and please pass this along to someone who might need it. Every click helps this message reach more people who are looking for hope and healing. All right, until next time, thanks again for joining me on the Mind Change podcast, where we are changing the world one mind at a time.